All right, Book of Joshua. Introduction. So, the author of the Book of Joshua is unknown. However, it does flow very nicely from Deuteronomy, narratively. So, one theory is that the editors of the Pentateuch are also responsible for the composition of the Book of Joshua, because it carries through a lot of the same narrative structure, and the themes are hinted at in the end of Deuteronomy that carry over into the Book of Joshua as well. The main thesis of the Book of Joshua is that Israel must be courageous and Israel must be righteous to conquer the Promised Land. If there's any failings that Israel has in the Book of Joshua, it's because they lacked courage or because they lacked righteousness, meaning they were veering off into polytheism. Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' minister, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness in this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. So verse 5 is important. Israel has a new mediator. That mediator is Joshua, right? Or Yahweh saves. Yes.
So isn't this like Joshua the son of Nun, and then like Jesus is the second Joshua, and like Jesus is like physically not the son of any man, so he's like the son of Nun. Is that like?
Right. So this is what I want everyone to get in a habit of getting away from, is that this is written in Hebrew, okay? And so you have to understand the original text. And when you translate and you find puns in English, it's not like, doesn't mean anything. Okay, yeah. Because actually, like, none would have a meaning in Hebrew, and that meaning would be way more important than the English pun that we accidentally have. Verse 5 continued, I will not fail you or forsake you. Verse 6, be strong and of good courage, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. All right, so verse 7, you get right up front. There's the thesis. Be strong and very courageous, and be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. What does it mean when you get a reference to all of the law? How do you summarize that? Yes, but like, what's the one law that is more important and above the other laws? Monotheism, okay? Like, be faithful to God. Do not worship other gods. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. Verse 8, this book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. And then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Be not frightened, neither be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. All right, so underline, God is with you, and that's why you're going to be successful. What's the purpose of all these covenants? It's for God to dwell amongst his people. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the camp and command the people. Prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in and take possession of the land which the Lord your God gives you to possess. So just as the old generation passed through the Red Sea and there's this allegory of baptism there as they entered into the wilderness and they began their mission. This new generation, they are now going to pass through the Jordan, and they're going to have their own baptismal imagery as they enter into the promised land and begin their mission, which is to be courageous and righteous. Let's jump ahead to chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 1. And Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." Now, why would Joshua send 2 spies into the land? When was the last time we saw espionage in the Bible? Giuseppe?
When they first came to the promised land?
When they first got on the border of the promised land, and that time they sent in 12 spies, and only 2 of them came back with a good report, and the other 10 brought about the downfall and made it such that everyone had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years because they brought the evil report. So now only 2 spies are sent in, which is a callback to the 2 good spies back in the book of Numbers. And they went, and they came into the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. Verse 2. And was told the king of Jericho, "Behold, certain men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring forth the men that have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, "True, men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. And when the gate was to be closed at dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords, and as soon as their pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Verse 8, very important. Before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God is he who is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now then, swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign. And save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." And the men said to her, "Our life for yours. If you do not tell this business of ours, then we will deal kindly and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land." All right, so, at verse 8 and following, make a reference to Exodus chapter 9, verses 14 through 16. Exodus chapter 9, verses 14 through 16, God is explaining to Moses, I'm working these mighty deeds in Egypt, not just that the Egyptians might know me, or the Israelites know me, but that all nations might hear about me. Exodus chapter 9, verses 14 through 16. So again, we see this as an example. God's plan worked, all right? The crossing of the Red Sea. It's been made known to the locals of the land that the Israelites are coming. And what does Rahab do? She has fear of the Lord. All right, this is why fear of the Lord is the first stage of wisdom. She recognizes, wow, Yahweh is really, really powerful. I'm going to cast my lot with Yahweh. So she has a conversion. And because of her conversion, she and her family are going to be spared. Everyone else in Jericho, they've heard about what's been going on in Egypt in the wilderness, and they're still putting their trust in their idols as they prepare for battle. All right, so to not have fear of the Lord, not to respect his power, is the height of folly, and that is the folly of the Canaanites as they're about to be conquered. Jump ahead to chapter 3. Israel is preparing to pass over the Jordan. And you can just make a note of chapter 3, if you hadn't already earlier, that this is a parallel to the crossing of the Red Sea. All right, this new generation is going to need another baptism. All right, so as the old generation passed through the waters of the Red Sea, this new generation that's going to come to land is passing through the Jordan. And in the Psalms, when we get there, you'll see there's the Israelites see the Jordan, the crossing of the Jordan, and the crossing of the Red Sea as the same event. There's a lot of synonymous parallelism that's used, and the Jordan and the Red Sea are used interchangeably in their poetry. And then just for clarification's sake, verse 15 reads, "And when those who bore the ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap far off." Okay, so it's not because the river ran dry, all right, or that it was low season or dry season if us could just ford past this river, all right, because I'm sure you've all forded past creeks at their low points. All right, but no, this is the time of harvest. This is the wet season. So the Jordan is overflowing on its banks at this time of year. It's clearly an act of God that dries up the Jordan, allowing the Israelites to cross through. And they do it when they bring the Ark of the Covenant. Jump ahead to chapter 4, verse 15. Chapter 4, verse 15. "And the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests who bear the Ark of the Covenant to come up out of the Jordan." So the priests wade into the Jordan. The Kohathites, we know it's the Kohathites because they're the ones responsible for carrying the Ark, right? They wade into the Jordan. The Jordan dries up at the presence of the Ark of the Covenant, and Israel crosses over. And now in verse 15, God says to Joshua, command the priests who bear the Ark of the Covenant to come up out of the Jordan. Joshua therefore commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. And when the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they encamped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. And he said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. All right, so you get another example. We've seen a concept of the Pentateuch, but the importance of catechesis. All right, it is so important for parents to pass on the faith to their children. It is not the primary responsibility of the theology teacher or the CCD teacher, or you could even make an argument of the pastor to pass on the faith to you. All right, it's the responsibility of the children. So when you go and you have kids, all right, no, you're the primary educator. It's your job to be the ones reminding them about, the stories of the Bible, passing on the faith, salvation, Christ, yada yada, the whole 9 yards. Verse 23. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which is dried up for us until we pass over. So that all the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Make a note to Psalm 114. Psalm 114 is a commemoration of this event. And we'll come back to that when we get to the book of Psalms. Chapter 5, when all the kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites that were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the sons of Israel until they had crossed over, they converted and were spared. No, their heart melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the sons of Israel, but there's no conversion. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel again a second time. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeah Halaroth. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. all the males of the people who came out of Egypt, all the men of war, had died on the way of the wilderness after they had come out of Egypt. Though all the people who came out had been circumcised, yet all the people that were born on the way in the wilderness after they'd come out of Egypt had not been circumcised. We don't know why the people in the wilderness who were born weren't circumcised. It's not like Moses had a near-death experience regarding circumcision. You think it would be on his mind to command the Israelites to do that. One possible theory is that if you remember, the whole point of the law of Moses is to make the people set apart from those they're dwelling around. So outside the promised land, circumcision was a common practice. So while the Israelites are journeying through the wilderness, the generation that's being born are not circumcised, and they're living amongst these people who are circumcised. So it's one way that they are set apart from the locals during their travels. When they cross over into the promised land, they are then circumcised because the inhabitants that they're going to conquer and their new neighbors, so to speak, are now, they're not circumcised. So as a way of setting them apart, now the nation of Israel is going to be a circumcised nation. Jump down to verse 10. While the sons of Israel were encamped in Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at evening in the plains of Jericho. On the next day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain, and the manna ceased. On the next day, when they ate of the produce of the land, and the sons of Israel had manna no more, but ate of the fruits of the land of Canaan. So this just furthers also the analogy or the typology of the manna for the Eucharist. Okay, so think about the Exodus story as the Christian life. You're baptized, you go to Mount Sinai, you get catechized after being baptized, you learn more about the law of God. And then you're wandering around in the wilderness, complaining, sinning, falling multiple times. But then eventually you come into the promised land. And in your journey in the wilderness, you're fed and nourished by the manna, by the Eucharist. But when you get to the promised land, you now have the produce of the land to sustain you. You're no longer relying on the manna. And it's going to be the same thing when we're in heaven. There is no more Eucharist, right? We're not receiving communion anymore when we're in heaven. We're experiencing the beatific vision, all right? The Eucharist is a foretaste of the union with God that we're going to be having in heaven. And so just as the manna ceases when the Israelites enter the promised land, the Eucharist is also going to cease when we enter into heaven. Well, not really jumping ahead, but verse 13. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes, and behold, a man stood before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us?" Very important question. Underline that. Are you for us? Or for our adversaries? And he said, very important response. Underline this one word. No. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord bid his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Put off your shoes from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy." And Joshua did so. All right, so some important lessons. God is not on the side of the Israelites. Are the Israelites God's chosen people? Yeah, that's their title. But it's not that God is unequivocally on their side. All right, Israel has to be on God's side. If Israel is not going to be on God's side and they want to go join Team Baal, then God's and his commander of the army will easily just turn against them as well. All right, so the obligation is on Israel to be on God's side. Also, it's a reminder that God is the one who's doing battle for them. Make a note to Exodus 23, verse 20. Exodus 23, verse 20, God promises that he's going to send an angel before them into the promised land. And this is that angel who's going before them. Also, is it the angel who's leading the Israelites into the promised land, or is it Joshua? Is it God's messenger going before them, or is it a human leading them? There's like this synergy going on in the first Joshua of like God and man are leading the Israelites, leading the nation. Okay, and you get this typology and foreshadowing of Christ, who is both God and man. All right, the second Joshua, Jesus, who's also going to be leading, the new Israel into the victory over the enemies of sin and death. All right, so when we get to chapter 6, it details the story of Jericho being taken and destroyed. And hopefully most of you are familiar with this story, that they marched around the city for 7 days. And on the seventh day, they marched around the city 7 times. And on the 7th time around the city, they blow the trumpets, and the walls of Jericho come tumbling down. Okay? Just remember, why are they doing everything 7 times and 7 times and 7 times and 7 times again? It's because of covenant, all right? 7 is the number of covenant. Also, sometimes people read the book of Joshua, and they're like, wow, it's really harsh. All these people are getting killed, and it's about warfare and battle and violence. There was a joke on the internet about like a mom complaining about violent video games and like giving the Bible to her kid instead. And it's like, this is equally as violent as some of the games out there. But some context to help to keep in mind. Jericho had 40 years to convert from the time of the Yahweh's manifestation in Egypt and the plagues. After 40 years, those people don't convert, all right? They've invited this upon themselves. So you can make a note also to Wisdom chapter 12, verse 10. In the book of Wisdom, chapter 12, verse 10, it highlights how all these nations that Israel went in and conquered, they had these 40 years. All right? Israel's wandering in the wilderness was actually a blessing to the other nations in the Promised Land, because it's actually giving them time to have a conversion of heart, and they do not. So let's jump ahead to chapter 6, verse 15. This details the destruction of Jericho. On the 7th day, they rose early at the dawn of day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city, and the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers that we sent." Yeah.
What was it?
It's Wisdom chapter 12, verse 10. Yes.
Thanks, Pat.
Sure. Also, another important thing to point out here is when people read through the book of Joshua, they also react in a way like, hey, it kind of looks like Israel's committing genocide because they're just going in and they're killing everyone in the city of Joshua, and like in the city of Jericho and through all these different lands. It's not genocide, because if it was genocide, they would kill Rahab too. All right, genocide is when you go and you destroy people based off of their genetics or their nationality. But Rahab here is going to live. And there's going to be other instances of people of the land who convert, and because they convert, they're also spared. All right. But here's your first example of that, where Rahab is spared. So this is not an act of genocide. Also, with just the amount of warfare, people they struggle with the violence in the book of Joshua, because God's also commanding that the people get wiped out. So the important thing to keep in mind on this factoid is that, one, everybody's going to die. All right. Everybody dies who's born. And God decides when all life ends, whether it's a natural death that falls under the will of God. If it's in battle, that falls within divine providence, okay, and the will of God. So natural death, for all intents and purposes, is the same thing as God also ordering, that someone be put to death for capital punishment, like the different penalties that are found in Deuteronomy and also here in the book of Joshua. There was a hand, Lily. Yes. Verse 18. But you, keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. Devoted things. So any of the religious items or religious trinkets, even if they're shiny, okay? Destroy them. Don't hold on to them. Verse 19. But all silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. They're going to be collecting these precious metals that eventually what they'll do is they'll use this to build the sanctuary and the temple in Jerusalem. All right. So God's giving them some wealth through this conquest, but he's giving them wealth so that they have an opportunity to give something back to God. A common analogy that's used is when the 4-year-old wants to buy a Christmas gift for one of the parents. Okay. My kid will come up to me and say, Daddy, can I have $5? Just kidding. My kid doesn't speak that coherently yet, but Daddy, can I have $5? Sure. Here's $5. And then she goes and buys me something at Five Below for Christmas. Okay. I just gifted myself something through my daughter. It's basically what God is doing with the Israelites is he's giving them this wealth, this conquest, but it's really so that they can then participate and give something back to God through the construction of the temple. Yes, Mary. Okay. Let's jump down to verse 26. So Jericho is destroyed, and Joshua laid an oath upon them at the time, saying, Cursed before the Lord be the man that rises up and rebuilds this city of Jericho. Now, your Bible probably has a reference in the bottom, a cross-reference to 1 Kings chapter 16. If it doesn't, you can just manually write one in. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 34. Because in 1 Kings, lo and behold, someone rebuilds Jericho, and Joshua's curse comes to fruition. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest son shall he set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. Chapter 7. But the sons of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things, those things they weren't supposed to take, the trinkets. For Achan, the son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things, and the anger of the Lord burned against the sons of Israel. Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai. All right, Jericho, to put in perspective, let's say, relatively speaking, it's like they just went and conquered Syracuse. All right, that great city fell. Now they're turning their focus and they're going to go attack Ai. Imagine if an army that just conquered Syracuse is now turning its gaze towards Moravia. It's going to invade Moravia, New York. You would think that the army that just conquered Syracuse would have an easy time going through Moravia. However, we're going to see that they're going to be defeated in battle by Ai. All right, so comparatively, it's like one very rural village to this sprawling metropolis, which highlights, their victory is contingent on their faithfulness to God. Verse 2, Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-aven, east of Bethel, and said to them, Go up and spy out the land. And the men went up and spied out Ai. And they returned to Joshua and said to him, Let not all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Do not make the whole people toil up there, for they are but few. So about 3,000 went up there from the people, and they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai killed 36 men of them, and chased them before the gate as far as Shebarim, and slew them at the descent. And the hearts of the people melted and became as water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell to the earth upon his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening, he and the elders of Israel. And they put dust upon their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all to give us into the hands of the Amorites and to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan. O Lord, what can I say when Israel has turned their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it and will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do for your great name? The Lord said to Joshua, Arise, why have you thus fallen upon your face? Israel has sinned, they have transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them. They have taken some of the devoted things, they have stolen and lied and put them among their own stuff. Therefore the sons of Israel cannot stand before their enemies. They turn their backs before their enemies because they have become a thing for destruction. I will be with you no more unless you destroy the devoted things from among you. Up, sanctify the people and say, Sanctify yourself for tomorrow. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, there are devoted things in the midst of you. All right, so chapter 7 details one half of that important thesis of the book of Joshua is that Israel needs righteousness in order to win. And because of the sin of Achan, they are going to be losing this battle. So, yeah, Achan and his family are then put to death. All right, and after, because of their idolatry, at the end of chapter 7, and then after, Achan has been executed and they fulfilled the requirements of the law, they go back and they do conquer Ai. Jump ahead to chapter 8, verse 30. Then Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the sons of Israel. As is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of unhewn stones upon which no man has lifted an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. So you can make a note to Deuteronomy chapter 27 through 29 is where the command is given to, put up these altars on Mount Ebal. Deuteronomy 27 through 29. Continuing at verse 32. And there in the presence of the sons of Israel, he wrote upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. And all Israel, sojourner as well as homeborn, with their elders and officers of the judges, stood on opposite sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in front of Mount Gerizim and half of them in front of Mount Ebal. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first that they should bless the sons of Israel, and afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded, which Joshua did not read before the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the sojourners who lived among them. In chapter 9, we then come to the strategy of the Gibeonites. This is another story that you can highlight as an example that the book of Joshua is not about genocide. These are not genocidal maniacs going to the promised land. Chapter 9, verse 1. When all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, heard of this, they gathered together with one accord to fight Joshua and Israel. So they heard about what the Israelites are doing and what God has done for them, and their response is, let's set up a team and let's fight them. These people don't fear the Lord. They don't have a respect for the power he's demonstrated. Verse 3, but when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard, when they hear the word that's coming to them of what God is doing, the Gibeonites heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai. They, on their part, acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions and took worn-out sacks upon their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a far country, so now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a covenant with you? They said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you? And where do you come from? They said to them, from a very far country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who dwelt in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, take provisions in your hand for the journey and go and meet them, and say to them, we are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set forth to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and moldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they are burst. And these garments and shoes of ours are worn out from the very long journey. So the men partook of their provisions and did not ask direction from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. All right, so these Gibeonites, they show up. They're being deceitful, but they are pledging, their loyalty and recognition of the power of Yahweh. So they're going to live. However, because they did it in a deceitful manner, they're going to end up as slaves. If they had not been deceitful and they just come out and converted like Rahab, then they would have been brought into the fold fully. Verse 16. At the end of the 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors, and that they dwelt among them. And the sons of Israel set out and reached their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, and Beeroth, and Kirath Jearim. But the sons of Israel did not kill them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to the congregation, we have sworn to them by Yahweh, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them and let them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of the oath which we swore to them. And the leader said to them, let them live. So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, as the leaders had said of them. Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, why did you deceive us, saying, we are very far from you when you dwell among us? Now, therefore, you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. They answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hand. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. So he did to them and delivered them out of the hand of the sons of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, to continue to this day in the place which he should choose. Chapter 10 is a very famous battle in the book of Joshua. It's the battle where Joshua prays to the Lord and the sun stands still. And if you know anything about the debate between science and religion, this is famous because it comes up in the Galileo controversy. Because in chapter 10, verse 12, we read, then spoke Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the men of Israel. And he said, in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon. And you, moon, in the valley of Aijalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. So there's a miracle during this battle that the sun stays in the sky, fixed in its place, so that the battle can continue, because you can't fight in the dark. And Israel wins the day. And so Galileo brought up, when he was talking about a heliocentric versus a geocentric universe, or solar system, that, because the sun's actually at the center and the earth is what's moving, the Bible's wrong because it says that the sun stands still, but really it's the earth that stood still. And then Galileo got in hot water for saying that the Bible had a falsehood. And really, if you think about it, this is the dumbest debate in the world, because we all still call the sunrise a sunrise, not a earth rotation. Look at that beautiful earth rotation. Okay, we still call it the sun is rising up, even though the sun is what's actually fixed. Okay, so they got into a dispute over the semantics. It's a nothing burger, but it's an example that you'll get from atheists who are like, science, baby. Look at Joshua being scientifically inaccurate. Yeah, so not really much to say about that, but it is a thing that happened. All right, we'll resume in chapter 14.